More than 200,000 of you really liked my previous video about writing techniques, so I decided to make another video in the same vein. These are 7 storytelling techniques that anyone can use, and it doesn't matter whether you're writing a novel, nonfiction, screenplay, or whether you're telling a story around a campfire. Number 1, bear at the door. I know about this technique because of a book called Making Shapely Fiction by Jerome Stern. And it's really a general storytelling technique that could be applied to any scene. Each time you start a scene, think about having a bear at the door. Obviously, this is meant metaphorically, and it just means that you have a pressing danger in this scene. It means there is an immediate problem. Now, if you use this technique, you gotta make sure of 2 things. 1, the bear is big. You really can't have a small problem or the scene won't really matter. And then 2, the bear needs to be urgent. It needs to be the type of problem that you have to solve right now, not later. Now, there are plenty of problems in a story that don't need to be solved at the present moment. For example, a lack of a love life doesn't demand an immediate solution. That character might grow old and die alone. Eesh, getting dark early in this one. Bear at the door would be if she's threatened with deportation to Canada, and so she has to pretend that her assistant, Ryan Reynolds, is actually her fiance. Now we have an immediate problem. Of course, sometimes bear at the door is literally a problem at your door. Think of Donna Tartt's novel, The Goldfinch. Theodore opens the door and discovers 2 people standing there. A chubby Korean woman with a short, spiky haircut, a Hispanic guy in shirt and tie who looked a lot like Luis on Sesame Street. I understood the instant that I saw him that my life, as I knew it, was over. So these are social workers, and they've come to tell him that his mom has been killed in a bomb blast and he's now a ward of the state. So for every scene that you write, ask yourself, do I have a bear at the door? A pressing, immediate problem that's big that your characters have to solve. And remember, one technique to write a book is to link a bunch of bear at the door scenes. As soon as your characters solve one problem of bear at the door, they have to move on to the next one. Technique number 2. Pick up a gun. This technique is not to be confused with Chekhov's gun, which you've probably heard of. Chekhov's gun says that if you show a gun in one of your scenes, it has to go off by the final act. So in Shaun of the Dead, they show a Winchester in a bar, and then later it's used to fight zombies. But this technique, pick up a gun, is more of a character knowledge tip. As an author, you have to know, what would it take for my character to pick up a gun? For some characters, it might be something really, really small, like a sidelong look or an insult. In Goodfellas, Tommy DeVito's character is incredibly thin-skinned. He gets called funny, and he's so deeply insulted, he's ready to kill somebody.
I'm funny how? I mean funny like I'm a clown, I amuse you?
Then he gets brought a check and smashes a bottle over some guy's head, and when someone looks at him sideways, he throws a plate at him. For other characters, it might take a lot more for them to pick up a gun, like say their child was kidnapped in Europe and starts getting trafficked. Now, I'd recommend that you look for weird reasons that your character resorts to violence. In Cormac McCarthy's No Country for Old Men, a gas station attendant notices that Javier Bardem's character is from Dallas, and that makes Javier want to kill him by flipping a coin that decides whether he lives or dies, because he's a psychopath. Ideally, what causes your character to pick up a gun works best when it is something that is unique to your character, something that maybe wouldn't trigger someone else. If you know what will make your character pick up a gun, then you can push them to the very edge of what they can handle and over it. Maybe they don't end up choosing violence, maybe they end up dealing with that pain in a different way, like drinking their sorrows away. But at least you have done the work of pushing them beyond your limits, and that makes for a very dramatic situation for the reader. Technique number 3 is casting shadows. Casting shadows is this technique where you have so many wonderful things going on in your book, puppies and sunshine and rainbows, that it casts shadows over what's to come. The reader starts to get anxious because they think, it can't stay this good forever, like what's underneath the surface? And so they know, and they start anticipating that something bad is going to happen, and therefore they keep reading because they want to find out what it is. Look at The Giver by Lewis Lowry. It's set in a utopia, it is beautiful, there's no crime or violence or suffering, and everyone has their assigned roles. But as a reader, you're wondering, okay, so what isn't perfect about this place? When are the cracks going to show? Or look at Lord of the Rings, which really starts in a kind of paradise in the Shire, which is kind of meant as the English countryside, by the way, not New Zealand, where it was filmed. And so even though things are beautiful and things are great there, the reader knows something is coming, and of course in chapter 2 we learn about the ring and going to Mordor. But this happy technique actually doesn't only have to work at the beginning of your story. Sometimes you actually see it at the end, like in a movie like Die Hard. Terrorists are defeated, police and ambulances are on the scene, the hostages are rescued, and when everything is resolved and life is good, and the reader assumes that peace and happiness and Christmas joy have been restored, suddenly one of Gruber's henchmen lurches up and attacks. So if you have a bunch of happiness at the beginning of your novel, it creates anticipation for what's going to go wrong. If you have lots of happiness at the end of a novel, which is where readers would normally expect it, then that's using the element of surprise, because no one saw it coming, because they're expecting the ending to be happy. Technique number 4, delayed decoding. Delayed decoding is a lag between your character's senses and what's actually happening to them. This happens to me, and honestly probably to you, at least once a week. You think one thing is happening, then you realize, oh, I misinterpreted the situation. This one time I went scuba diving in the Blue Hole in Belize. Absolutely beautiful, right? So I get down to about 100 feet and I glance above me and I see other divers getting into the water. And a little bit later, my wife swims over and she goes, you know, look up. And I look up again, and what I thought were divers were actually sharks above us, a whole bunch of sharks. That's delayed decoding. At first I thought those were people, and then when I look again, oh, there are sharks between me and the surface of the water. A great example of this in a novel is in Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. Marlowe's just boating down the river in a steamboat, and he doesn't realize at first that he's being attacked by natives. Sticks, little sticks were flying about, thick. They were whizzing before my nose, dropping below me, striking behind me against my pilot house. We cleared the snag clumsily. Arrows, by Jove! We were being shot at. So at first he thinks, oh, they're just weird sticks flying, and then he realizes, no, those are arrows. We're being attacked. In the same scene, he sees a cane, and then he realizes, oh wait, no, that is a spear, and it has just killed the pilot of our boat. So a good way to use delayed decoding is as a way to expose what your character desires. Say they just broke up with someone, and so in a crowded scene, they think they see that person across the room, but then when they look again, they realize, oh, it's just a stranger. Or perhaps a girl is at her locker, and she thinks a boy is leaning in to kiss her, but then she realizes, oh, wait, no, he's just trying to get to his locker behind me. Awkward. But in both of those scenarios, the character is misinterpreting based on what they wish would happen. Technique number 5, callback. A callback is a technique that's borrowed from comedians. It's basically a joke that references a previous joke. Eddie Izzard has this stand-up bit about evil giraffes.
Evil giraffe.
Giraffes munching more than their share of leaves. Oh, they're so evil. And then he keeps on referencing evil giraffes in the rest of the set, basically on top of his other jokes. So he's getting 2 laughs, one for the joke he's currently doing, and another laugh because people remember how funny that evil giraffes bit was. So how do you use this in a novel? 1, you can use a callback in dialogue. After Harry Potter gets detention, Umbridge makes him write lines that say, I must not tell lies. And magically, they also appear etched on his own hand, which is super painful. Later on in that book, Umbridge needs to be safe from the centaurs, and she tells Harry, tell them I mean no harm.
Tell them I mean no harm!
And Harry gets this wicked one-liner.
I'm sorry, Professor. I must not tell lies.
That line wouldn't be nearly as punchy if she hadn't punished him in that particular way earlier in the book. Now, some people actually mess up callbacks with foreshadowing, but they're very different things. Foreshadowing is looking forward. It's planning something early to sort of tell the reader what's going to happen later. Callbacks are where you're looking backwards. You're saying, oh, I'm going to give you something, and it's going to help you remember something that was earlier in the book. Now, if you keep on repeating callbacks again and again and again and again, it kind of stops being a callback and starts to be something more like a refrain, like Kurt Vonnegut saying, so it goes in Slaughterhouse-Five. But let's talk about one more type of callback you can use, and this one is a visual callback. In Wally Lamb's She's Come Undone, Elaine draws this picture of what she wants her future husband to look like. And he's got very curly hair, and he's got these wire-rimmed glasses. Hundreds of pages later, at the very end of the book, Elaine finally meets and starts dating this guy with very curly hair. And the very next scene, he shows up with a brand new pair of wire-rimmed glasses. The 6th technique you should know is tonal dissonance. Sometimes it's a good idea not to have the tone of your writing match the subject that you're writing about. We just mentioned Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five. Let's use that again, because the tone of that book is vastly different than the subject. The tone of that book is sort of breezy and offhand and casual, while the subject that it's talking about is the fire bombing of Dresden, one of the worst bombing campaigns in all of World War II. They just obliterated this entire city. But why is he writing with that kind of tone about this kind of subject? I think using that tone emphasizes the absurdity and the senselessness of the war. That tone also accomplishes characterization work for Billy Pilgrim, who's been desensitized to war because of his trauma. So the tone is sort of like his coping mechanism. Or look at Douglas Adams' The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Adams frequently uses tonal dissonance for comedic effect. And if you read the book, you know, it's a hilarious book. So here's a small example. He has this very flat, bureaucratic tone when announcing the demolition of Earth. As you will no doubt be aware, the plans for development of the outlying region of the galaxy require the building of a hyperspatial express route through your star system. And regrettably, your planet is one of those scheduled for demolition. The process will take slightly less than 2 of your Earth minutes. Thank you. I mean, it's so like off the cuff. It's so casual, like, oh, by the way, Earth will be destroyed. But I think this works really well to highlight the absurdity of our our place in the universe, telling us like how absolutely small we are in the entire cosmos. Oh, and it ends up being very funny, of course. Really, what tonal dissonance is exploiting is the fact that we humans can feel multiple things at a time and have very complex emotions, and that we can be pitying Dresden for being firebombed at the same time feeling like, man, that's the way of the world, so it goes. So if the piece that you're writing doesn't feel right, try a vastly different, contrasting tone to what your tone should be. You might find that it creates this excellent friction that the reader will enjoy. Technique number 7 is what about the baby? This technique was inspired by Alice McDermott's book of the same name. Alice leads a talk with a bunch of women at a retirement home, and they get together to talk about the movie Julia, which is based on the memoir Pentimento. It's about 2 women smuggling money to fund the resistance in World War II, and one of the women has a baby. Unfortunately, the mother of the baby ends up dying in the war, and the friend can't find the mother or the baby. And eventually that woman returns to the US. So Alice wanted to talk about big themes in the book with the women. She wanted to talk about war and metaphors and love. And all the women, all they wanted to talk about was, what about the baby? What happened to the baby? The book, the movie, they never really tell you what happens. There's just this baby out there and nobody knows the end of that storyline. What about the baby is a clever way to think about making sure that you follow up on the plot strands you create in the beginning of your book. If there are obvious questions that need to be resolved, you really probably should do that by the end of your book, or else you're gonna have angry readers on your hands. Don't get so caught up in the coolness of your story that you forget about the basic things that your readers want answered. Don't forget to tell them what happened to the baby. If you like this video, you'll probably like my other video of 7 other writing techniques, so give that a watch.